Today's topic, we will focus on substance abuse during the pandemic and the effects on prohibition. I think for us in South Africa, if we did not think that substance abuse in our country is a problem with specific reference to alcohol, then I think COVID-19 has highlighted this fact for us. Our country had to close bottle stores twice due to the inability of some of its users to drink responsibly. And as we know, the closing of the bottle stores just rippled into the illegal sales of alcohol. So really is not helping. So today we will talk, the talk will not just focus on alcohol, we will focus on substances in general. And we are absolutely looking forward to Carol Venter from ICAS, who will share with us her experience, but also the outcomes of her research. Now, who is Carol Venter? I see you can see her there in the video. She is a social worker by profession who started her career at SANCA, which is the Alcohol and Drug Center, specifically in the Eastern Cape in 1997. And from there, she also was the director, leaving the organization in 2006. She was also a lecturer at Rhodes University. And she is currently a treatment professional with the National Responsible Gambling Program. In essence, she has more than 20 years experience in the field of substance abuse and addiction. She recently completed her Master's in Occupational Social Work at the Wits University, and her research study was on the substance abuse in the workplace and the impact on the short-term solution-focused approach that we as EAP practitioners use within our profession. In Carol's own words, this topic of substance abuse and addiction is truly my passion. So Carol, thank you for sharing your passion with us today. We will see you at the end of your presentation, where we will deal with some questions and answers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Charmaine. Thank you and good morning to everybody. It really is an honor and a privilege to be with you all today. It was 6 months ago, if I'm not mistaken, that I first touched on this topic during the EduWeb series last year. And a lot has happened in that 6 months, in those 6 months. So I'm looking forward to giving you a little bit of an update, sharing some research and some anecdotal sort of feedback that I've got from SANCA National and from the Medical Research Council, and perhaps a little bit of my own sort of experience along the way. So thank you so much, and we'll get going. Please do post your questions. I'm very happy towards, well, at the end to have a question and answer session with you, and we can tackle some of the concerns and the queries and the input that comes from your side then as well. Right, so we're going to start the session. And now if my slides would move, that would be lovely. All right, just to do a quick, overview, a very general overview when it comes to substance abuse and addiction in South Africa and the world. I'm going to look a little bit very quickly, just what are the substances that we see commonly used in South Africa, and then we'll look at the pandemic itself, and then of course prohibition and what that has done, and how it has impacted both the social user as well as those that are possibly in treatment or struggling with the substance abuse or addiction issue during this time. And then at the end, I'm going to look at guidelines for EAP practitioners, but that will also be relevant for anyone that is from an HR perspective or a managerial or supervisor as well. So I hope that we have a nice mixed audience out there, and I hope that you'll enjoy this ride with me. Right, so this is probably some stats that you already know. We read them very often when we are reading articles on substance abuse or drug use in South Africa. But basically, in South Africa, we have twice the world norm of consumption across the board of substances. We are recognized as one of the drug capitals of the world. So we import, we export, we manufacture, we consume, we're right up there with the top players in the rest of the world. 15% of the South African population has an addiction problem or an addiction issue. And that is statistics that's been provided by the Medical Research Council. I think that's quite a high number. I don't have a comparison with other countries, but I consider that to be quite a high number. And please note that when we speak about addiction, it does cover what is now recognized as addictions as well, but behavioral addiction. So with that, we're not just talking about substances, we're talking about behaviors like gambling, online shopping, pornography, sex, eating, exercise, even work is recognized as an addictive behavior. So I'm not going to focus too much on those because this isn't a talk on behavioral addiction, it is on substances, but I certainly will, just probably make some mention as we go along. And one addict affects a minimum of 16 people, either directly or indirectly. So you've probably heard the term, or you use the term, that substance abuse and addiction doesn't happen in a vacuum. It is a family issue. It is a family problem. And that most definitely is the case, because it may not just be the direct family members, let's say within the household, that are experiencing this problem with the addict or the substance user, but definitely individuals in the extended family, and certainly within the workplace as well. We have colleagues that have to pick up the slack due to absenteeism, due to presenteeism. We have managers who become over-involved because they're trying to manage this individual. We have indirect family members that are now having to financially and psychosocially support the immediate family. So the ripple effect is significant when we look at this problem. Substance abuse costs the economy around 20 billion per year. I think we've all seen that figure very often. It's obviously due to the health implications, the connection to trauma cases. And I certainly agree with what Charmaine was saying, that one thing that the pandemic has done for us is put our substance abuse, and particularly our alcohol use, under the spotlight here in South Africa, and really brought an awareness of our unhealthy and irresponsible behavior and drinking patterns, and how that impacts on our not only our health, but also things like road accidents and trauma cases within hospitals and that. So I think we've learned a lot of lessons, and we certainly will touch on some of those. Will our behavior change? I think that's the big question at the end of the day. Right, and then for those of us who are in the field of treatment, only 1 in 18 individuals actually step forward to seek treatment or seek help. And that's very concerning. I mean, 1 in 18. So there's 17 individuals struggling, probably at the far end of the spectrum, and not stepping forward for help. And the reason for that is the stigma associated. And I, sort of reflecting on where we are at the moment with our economy, with people really struggling in terms of jobs, companies are closing down, employment is dropping, unemployment rate is rising rapidly in South Africa. People are probably, especially those in the workplace, are more scared than ever to come forward and admit that they have a problem, because they are worried it will jeopardize their work or their opportunities for promotion in the workplace as well. So those are all the things we must keep in mind, and constantly challenge ourselves to look at, what are we doing to address the stigma? What are we doing to make it a safe space for individuals to admit that they are struggling and to admit that they need to seek help? And I'll cover a lot on stigma towards the end of today, because that is something I really am very passionate about. So yes, as I'm already saying, the workplace is not immune. 67% of substance abusers and addicts are part of the South African workforce. That's also a stat from research done by the Medical Research Council, and certainly one that came up in the research that I recently did in a large financial company in South Africa. So it's not just our individuals that we see, being homeless, or it's not street kids, or just the youth that are, not at school, but supposed to be at school or at university. It's the workforce that are struggling with this problem. And we'll touch a little bit on that more later. And it just brings home the fact that we really need to look at this and address this problem in the workplace. And now we sit with an additional challenge that the workplace has shifted. This is my workplace. I'm standing here in my home. I don't even have shoes on because I have the freedom not to wear heels because I'm not in the office. And you know, how we now manage substance abuse issues in the workplace, companies that were doing drug testing, all of that has shifted and changed. But I don't know if managers, if service providers have shifted accordingly to make sure that we have programs and interventions to help us with the current sort of fluid workforce that we have. So alcohol, which we'll be talking a lot about this morning, remains the primary substance of abuse in the workplace, and then cannabis, cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamines such as TIC come through as the illicit substances amongst employees. So they're not obviously just using that at home and coming to work intoxicated if they are going to the office or to the workplace, but they are now using it at home as well during working hours. So we'll touch on that. So here, as I said, I just quickly want to give you a little bit of a visual walk through the library, if I can put it that way, of the substances that are commonly abused within South Africa. We've already said alcohol. Yeah, so I don't think you really need to know what that looks like. We all know. I even joked with Charmaine and I said, is it really water in my water bottle today? Hubbly bubbly, I have added this to the list. It's socially acceptable, your flavored tobaccos that are smoked, but I'm a little bit concerned about that right now because, well, I always have been, but in terms of the fact that it's socially acceptable, there's a mouthpiece that is shared. So I do wonder how much education there is around there about the dangers of sharing the mouthpiece on a hubbly bubbly right now. It may not be that addictive, but we need to think of the health implications. Nicotine, if there are any cigarette smokers out there, I'm sure that you are breathing a sigh of relief. They did not ban cigarette sales this time around. And we do know that there's a large percentage of our population that do smoke cigarettes, excuse me, and that do then, you know, have an affiliation to nicotine. Cannabis, we could have a whole day on cannabis itself, but hopefully by now you all do know that cannabis has been decriminalized or legalized in South Africa. We are still waiting for the guidelines in terms of levels of intoxication so that we know how to measure that for driving, and we know how to measure that in terms of intoxication at the workplace. But there is still a very big blur around the fact that it is not legal to smoke cannabis in a public space or within the workspace, and then obviously not within working hours as well. So that's just the little bit I'll share on that today. And then, of course, Mandrax has always been around in South Africa since the 70s when it was first a sleeping tablet that was then pulled from the shelves, so to speak, and went underground. We manufacture a lot of Mandrax, and it is very often crushed and mixed in with cannabis. Crystal meth or TIC, often referred to as speed in the rest of the world when you're watching your American movies or your Breaking Bads or so forth. South Africa, it is referred to as TIC. It's a stimulant, it's smoked, very cheap, quite readily available as well. So that is definitely out there in our communities. Nayope or Wonga, it is called by different names in different communities. Normally a Dacha base, and then bulked and mixed with various other substances. In some areas it might be heroin. In other areas, when I was in the Eastern Cape, it was very common for ARVs to be mixed in there. You hear stories of rat poisons and all sorts of things being added. It can be injected, but more commonly in South Africa, thankfully, we have a culture of smoking more than we do of injecting. So it most commonly is smoked. And then, of course, cocaine will always be there, more of a white-collar drug, if we can put it that way, normally in a powder form that is snorted, and is highly addictive, and it is a stimulant of the central nervous system. Crack cocaine, just a derivative really of cocaine, normally in a rock form or crystal form, and that's more commonly smoked, just gives also a greater high than cocaine, and because it is bulked, it is normally cheaper as well. LSD, we don't hear so much of these days. It comes and it goes, is certainly my learning over the couple of years. But yeah, it's lysergic acid, so usually in the form of a tattoo or a microdot or a sticker placed onto the skin. It's a hallucinogen, so it causes individuals to have hallucinations when they're under the influence. And then ecstasy, very commonly a club drug, in South Africa, also very big in the 90s when we had a lot of raves. The rave phenomenon sort of died out, but it certainly still is a club drug, quite socially acceptable in circles. And I hadn't heard much of ecstasy, and then interestingly enough, I had been speaking to a friend recently who mentioned that she had engaged at home, in ecstasy use. And that was quite interesting to me. So it just showed again how that's gone, into the home. All right, heroin. We certainly don't have the levels of abuse that they do, for example, in the States and in the UK. We don't have a needle exchange program here. Again, I say to you, thankfully, we have more of a smoking culture in South Africa than injecting. And I always do say that is quite a blessing that we have such lower levels of heroin abuse, because if you think of HIV/AIDS in South Africa and the problems we have with that, we would surely have much higher rates due to the sharing of needles if we had the same sort of problem that the UK, for example, was sitting with. But it certainly is, it is out there. And then let's not forget the over-the-counter medications. I think they have become more popular during this time. I'll touch a little bit later on, individuals sort of self-soothing and self-medicating while at home. But our over-the-counter medication abuse goes very underreported. It's the Panados, it's the grandpa headache tablets, it's the cough mixtures, it's the painkillers that get abused. And as I say, very underreported in South Africa. It doesn't very often come through in our stats because I don't think we acknowledge the problem that it is. And then, of course, prescription medication, where you do need to go through a doctor and get a script. Those are often codeine-based medications. Those are very often your mood stabilizers, especially benzodiazepines, for example. That came through very strongly in my research, especially the abuse of Urbanol, where individuals use it very commonly in the workplace to help manage stress and anxiety at work. So that's just a really quick fly through there because I don't want to get too stuck in that. As I say, we could spend a day on each of those drugs and we don't really have that sort of time. So let's reflect back on almost, what is it now, 10 months of the pandemic, and what are the lessons that we have learned, what has happened in South Africa during this time, particularly now talking around, the use of substances and what has happened there. I was even trying this morning just to remember the roller coaster we've been on. We went into the full ban, the prohibition, which, as I said, was cigarettes and alcohol. We were then taken out of that to, what was it then, level 2, where we just had restrictions. So it was Monday to Thursday, and I think restaurants and so forth could serve until around 10 o'clock at night. I think we all became quite comfortable with that. And then, bam, as the second wave hit us, and we had to reconsider things and the impact that COVID is having in South Africa. The prohibition came again, and I've even lost track now of when that was. Was it 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago? I can't even recall. Rumor has it that we'll have this till about the 15th of February, when the president has a family meeting with us again. But certainly I've been looking at the stats. I do confess I didn't look yesterday, but there is some success. We are definitely dropping our numbers of positive COVID cases. So can we say that there is a positive correlation with the banning of alcohol with that? Not sure, but I certainly think it plays a very large role in that. So let's look at some of the things we've experienced and learned during this time. Firstly, that crime, trauma, and drinking and driving has decreased. All right, so whether it was with the restrictions or with the complete prohibition, we have seen a decrease in all these rates, which is a great sigh of relief for us in South Africa. When you think of the number of fatalities we normally have on the roads over December, over the festive season, firstly, yes, people stayed home. It was a tough decision for many of us to make, but we chose to stay home and stay safe. But also people were not drinking and driving. We've all by now seen and heard that Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital, for the first time ever in its history, on New Year's did not have one single trauma case. I mean, the picture of the trauma unit's beds empty was actually quite a haunting picture to see, which is just ridiculous because we're so used to seeing those beds absolutely full, and there we are, you know, with capacity, with no beds being taken at all, and those beds available for emergency COVID cases, which is exactly what was wanted. I don't know as well if you realize that during the prohibition now, the drinking limit is zero tolerance at 0.00, not 0.05. And I, for the first time in my life, was in a roadblock where I was breathalyzed on New Year's Day. And I mean, thankfully, I had not been drinking. I'd been swimming and just, relaxing with my family. It was still absolutely terrifying. And I did not know there was a zero tolerance. I still thought it was 0.05. And I could hear people in the cars around me that had been pulled over that were fighting with the police officers. And for a brief moment, I sort of thought, oh, have I taken any cough mixture, any medication? Did I eat anything with alcohol? Just trying to see, was there any possibility that I was 0.00? I then was breathalyzed, and thank the Pope, I was 0.00 as I should be. But that was quite an eye-opener for me because I didn't even realize that was the case. I don't know how I missed that. So just to move on from there, we've also seen an increase rather, in relationship stress, in abuse and domestic violence. I mean, any social media platform you've been on, any newspaper article you've read in the last few months, we saw horrific spikes, especially in domestic violence and, GBV, and a lot of awareness around that as well, which is great. But where is this coming from? I think there's a bigger psychological picture here in terms of where we are at in terms of anxiety and stress and uncertainty, which obviously brings out that sort of frustration and acting out, if I can put it that way. But at the same time, people are in confined spaces. People are working from home as families that they've not had to do before. The perpetrator perhaps would, be going to work and leave the family at home, and that was their safe space for the day, and that could sort of be contained. Now everybody is at home, people are frustrated with each other, people are tripping over each other. We've just been told recently schools will only open, government schools will only open on the 15th of February. It places so much stress on individuals at home. That doesn't excuse the behavior, it just explains some of the behavior and some of the challenges we are seeing. And of course, there's been a black market boom. I think 2 days ago in my neighborhood, there was a pub that had been shut down on the corner because they were found to be selling alcohol. People were coming, loading their boots and then going off into like Hillbrow and so forth to go sell alcohol from the boot. There was two restaurants, if I'm not mistaken, closed down this week, selling alcohol to patrons. Dr. Charles Perry, who some of you may be familiar with from the Medical Research Council, had been on the radio the other day. I was listening to him speaking about the dangers of the abuse of methanol and how, individuals have become, if I can say, desperate and therefore look at other means of obtaining alcohol. And of course, if you have connections, it's easy enough to be able to purchase on the black market now. So many people, and I won't include myself because I have not purchased alcohol during this time, but they have become criminals unwillingly and unwittingly by purchasing alcohol on any sort of black market at the moment. All right, and then a positive is that more people have reached out for help. We have certainly seen that, speaking with my ICAS hat on, we have seen, the increase in great volumes of calls of individuals coming through to our call centres seeking support and counselling during this time for anxiety, stress, depression, substance abuse, financial problems, relationship problems, and so forth. SADC has shared many stats in the media as well in terms of the increase in utilisation of their services. Speaking to Sanka National, they shared how their WhatsApp group in particular, which is a point of access they have, how the numbers just burst on there in terms of people reaching out, seeking help, especially going through withdrawals. And there were a lot of individuals during the first prohibition with cigarettes being banned as well that were reaching out for help in terms of how to quit cigarette smoking and how to cope with those cravings and so forth. So there has been, I believe, some behavioral change. I think some individuals have used the opportunity to quit or to manage, their drinking better. But then, of course, there are others where the anxiety and the stress and the isolation has resulted in them increasing use. The sad news is we do not have stats in South Africa. The Medical Research Council team told me they are gathering the data from all different treatment facilities and starting to analyze that. So they're hoping within the next few months to be able to release some data, looking at treatment, looking at relapse. Of course, it's understanding this has been severely impacted on because treatment centers themselves had to practice social distancing and therefore could often take only half of their normal capacity. And for those of us in the field, we already know how difficult it is to access those services. But again, good news is many service providers, including ICAS, moved onto virtual platforms, which has landed really well. I'm able to have counselling sessions with individuals in the Eastern Cape and in KZN and then in Johannesburg, which I've never been able to do before. I'm assisting a problem gambler at the moment who shared with me that he has managed to attend almost 90 meetings of Gamblers Anonymous in 90 days. And he's been able to log into meetings in America and log into meetings in the UK and all across South Africa. And what a phenomenal experience that has been for him in his recovery. But of course, can everybody access those resources? Not everyone in our community has data. Not everyone in our community has a laptop, even a smartphone to be able to log in. But then at least telephone counselling and so forth has also become a very popular means of providing support. So I think we've shifted in how we treat individuals, and that's very positive as well. I'll probably touch a little bit more on that later. All right, but let's look just a little bit more at the alcohol ban and the impact there. And if I'm not mistaken, Nicole, we're going to do a quick poll here. Just want to ask you, in your opinion or your experience, whether that be personal or whether it be professionally, do you feel that people are drinking more due to the pandemic and the prohibition? Do you feel people, or do you believe, or have you experienced that people generally have started to drink more or drink more often? You can just pop a yes or a no. I can do that as well if I'm not mistaken. So I'm going to do that quickly. And then let's just see from the audience.
So the votes are coming in thick and fast. We're on about 65% people have voted so far.
Lovely. Lovely. Yeah, you don't have to confess for yourself. But just what is your thoughts, or what have you heard or seen? Are people drinking more during this time? There we go. All right, so we have 53% saying yes and 47% saying no. Okay, so 6% difference, almost on the fence. I think what we are seeing and what we are learning is that, yes, people are drinking more. Some of the stats that have come through from the UK and America is that with surveys that have been run, people are drinking up to 17% more than they were before the pandemic. So sometimes that they've increased their frequency in terms of, they never used to drink, let's say, every day when they logged off from work or when they finished work, or that they are drinking during working hours as well, and I'll touch on that later. But definitely there seems to be an increase in the use and the consumption of alcohol. Maybe we'll see that changing because people are, well, in South Africa, we're going to run out of supplies. I'm sure many people will run out of supplies in the next couple of weeks. Sorry, just moving on here then. All right, but why, quickly to touch on why has the government done what they've done? There are still many people that disagree with this decision. But let's remember that we are rated 6th in the world by the World Health Organization when it comes to alcohol consumption. 35% of South Africans drink alcohol, and of that 35%, 60% engage in binge drinking. So binge drinking is when you drink around 4 drinks within a 2-hour period. I mean, and that doesn't really sound a lot if you think of somebody who's drinking shots. Maybe if you're thinking a glass of wine or bottle of beer or something, then it doesn't, seem to be that much. But that is considered binge drinking. So, and engaging in that sort of drinking at least twice a week is what we would classify as binge drinking. So we have heavy drinkers and we have binge drinkers in South Africa. And we see around 62,000 deaths in South Africa that are directly related to alcohol, whether that is road fatalities or whether that is other traumas, through violence, stabbing, fires, etc. So another huge issue is the impact that alcohol has on us socially and in terms of our health. So that was another good reason, or another couple of good reasons of why we needed to address alcohol consumption. So we needed to limit community transmissions through socializing, and we know alcohol is a socially acceptable drug. So individuals will socialize and drink, or drink and socialize. So trying to remove that element as we try to social or engage in social distancing at this time. Also, alcohol-related traumas, I touched on that with the marijuana example and the road accidents. Interpersonal violence, obviously that can be fueled by substance use when the person is under the influence. But of course, where I think we're sitting now as well, when individuals are going through withdrawals and they are in discomfort, they're also likely, unfortunately, to engage in personal violence. And then, of course, looking at our health. Alcohol is a depressant of the central nervous system. It does impact on our immunity. It lowers our immunity. Our vitamin B levels are often depleted with alcohol abuse. So it can compromise our lung health and our general immunity, which we know is something we don't want to be messing with right now while we try to remain healthy and in some way, at least try to fight the COVID transmissions. So what impact is the lockdown and the pandemic having? I have touched on a few of those already, but just looking from a very broad perspective, the closing of borders intermittently over time across the world, and obviously even in South Africa, we know our borders have now been closed, for example, with Zim and our neighboring countries now, but it's affected the normal illicit drug routes. So the street drugs, or the illicit drugs that were available are not as readily available as before. There's a lot of research around this that's been done, for example, in the States. So you're very welcome to just Google that, and you'll see quite a few research papers that have come through. But what has happened as a result is not just that, people have been, stopped using and gone into withdrawals and cope with that. Yes, some may, but it's changed the patterns of abuse. So individuals are subsidizing or, substituting, using other types of medication now. I was reading of the term in-house drugs, which is obviously what we have within the home, what we have that is accessible. So I imagine with that an example, for example, of a cocaine user that might not be able to get cocaine through their normal sort of patterns at the moment, or their normal market, but they are maybe able to access some, now I've gone completely blank. I wanted to say Rohypnol, but it's not Rohypnol. Ritalin. They may be able to take Ritalin to substitute for their cocaine, or they are finding other stimulants at least just to try keep them going during this time. So there is more experimentation taking place, and there is boredom, which is also fueling some substance use as well. All right, and this, I think we all know. This, I think every single one of us, if I could see all your faces out there and ask you to raise a hand, have you felt anxiety and stress more than usual during this time with the pandemic? Have you experienced a loss during this time? And have you been fearful during this time? I think every single one of us would raise our hand. Looking at where we at, looking at transmission, looking at people becoming ill, some of us being ill themselves. This has all caused us to be in a terrible psychological state. Yes, some are more resilient, but many are really struggling with isolation, and are struggling with the environment and the climate in the world as it currently is. And isolation leads to anxiety. It can lead to frustration and anger. It impacts on sleep. It can result in depression as well. And added to this is the bereavement and loss that many people are starting to experience. How many individuals I've spoken to this week where we've said, those statistics of people that have died from COVID are not just statistics for us anymore. They're now becoming names. Every one of us has lost somebody, whether it's a colleague, a friend, a family member due to COVID. And there's also this term of anticipatory loss. We sit and we wonder, and we in fear and anxiety of how many people could we lose? What happens if so-and-so who has comorbidities becomes positive? And what if, their health is impacted? And what if they become, or they succumb to COVID? So this anticipatory loss that we're living with as well, it's causing a lot of anxiety and discomfort within us. And isolation, due to all these reasons, causes psychological distress. And we know that addiction is a manifestation of psychological discomfort or pain or distress. So the risk of individuals, engaging in substance use is higher than ever right now. And then looking at the social users, so I'll put myself into that category. How has it affected us? Again, the isolation is there. How stress is making us more susceptible to misusing substances during this time, and therefore more, susceptible to possibly developing an addiction as well. And we're more likely to reach out to self-soothe or to self-medicate at this time to try and manage the stress, the anxiety that we're under, just sometimes the frustration of the situation that we're in, and the change in our lifestyles that we've gone through as we've had to adapt to the new normal, as they say. And remember that substance or even behavioral addiction, and that plays on the reward system of our brain. So it does not necessarily always make us feel better, but it does at least make us feel slightly, if I can say, relieved. It does help to sort of reduce some of the psychological pain or frustration or that we are in, even for a very short period of time. So that relationship there results in us being more susceptible, even though we would consider ourselves, social drinkers, for an example. And we need to be on the alert for binge drinking because alcohol has become a forbidden fruit. So, we know how teenagers and younger, when parents say, no, don't drink, it's bad for you, I don't want you to drink till you're 18, whatever that might be, whatever the family rule might be, it makes it even more enticing. And therefore, we need to be alert to binge drinking. As a matter of interest, life is so ironic. My brother is in the alcohol industry, in that he owns an exclusive whiskey shop and a whiskey bar in Johannesburg. And I obviously talked to him and how this impacts his business during this time. And he's learning from the first prohibition was that they can pick up again afterwards. People will resort back to their behavior. Some then buy more than they usually would, because I sort of joke and say they've been thirsty during that time and they want to sort of catch up. But yes, the alcohol has become forbidden fruit for us now. So there is a tendency to binge drink when we are drinking, or when we do have access to it again, to binge drink then. So those are all the things we need to be alert to. And then remote working has blurred the lines between work and personal hours, so that accessibility. And there was a survey conducted in December in the UK. I think they said it was just over 200 people that were working remotely participated in the survey. And 9 out of 10 indicated in that survey that they are drinking at home during working hours. They may have a drink during lunchtime, or they're starting to drink earlier than they usually would because they can have a glass of wine at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock while they're sitting working at home. What damage is it going to do? Who's going to see? And therefore, yes, women in particular, they're saying from that particular survey, are more at risk. We've got a 65% greater risk of becoming addicted to alcohol in particular, because of the additional issues women are facing in terms of childcare, trying to do the whole work-life balance thing, taking on a lot of the household responsibilities, but then also being at home and having access to be able to drink more frequently. So these are things as managers, firstly, and obviously as practitioners, that we do need to be alert to and keep thinking about as well. And what do we do about that? How do we stop that behavior? And then quickly to look at individuals that do have substance abuse issues. Firstly, again, the social isolation, the anxiety, loss that is being experienced during the pandemic has impacted on recovery, and has increased risk for relapse. For all the reasons I've already mentioned, people are more susceptible, people are struggling. Again, I say to you, I do feel that service providers and a lot of practitioners even have been able to shift and have gone, to providing support groups and counselling through other means other than face-to-face. And although treatment facilities can only take in, let's say, half of what they usually could, at least they are still taking individuals in, and they are looking at more outpatient programs. But still, the risk is there. It is a tricky time for people that are struggling with an addiction. So I've sort of covered that in the next point. And then, of course, what I've already said, the increased risk of over-the-counter medication prescription, where they are then perhaps substituting because they can't get hold of their drug of choice. Just even touching quickly on that, I'm sure you also read recently, there was a horrible case that was in the news. There were 6 young people, so I think they were sort of matriculants over the December period. And I think it happened on New Year's. 6 of them had made a concoction of meths, of paraffin, disprin, and I can't remember now what the 4th ingredient was. Methanol. I think they'd managed to get hold of methanol, and had mixed that into a concoction which they drank. all 6 were in hospital, 3, which were young women, have passed away. There's also been stories of people drinking hand sanitizer out of desperation. And yeah, there apparently aren't any cases we can really put our fingers on, but there are sort of urban myths or rumors out there that individuals do sometimes drink hand sanitizer to obviously access the alcohol within there, which is quite a frightening thought. Right, so yeah, looking at time, I think I've got 10 minutes left. So I just want to share this short video with you. And then I'm going to touch on some of the guidelines in terms of what can we do about this, particularly when it comes to the work phase. So I'm handing over to Nicole, who's going to start the video for us. Awesome, thanks, Nicole. Yeah, I feel that one of the theories that I strongly believe in when it comes to addiction is quite relevant right now, in terms of the fact that there's a school of thought over the last couple of years that the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. So sort of pedaling back a little bit from that, it's that sort of isolation and disconnection that results in a person experiencing or results because of a person experiencing a psychological sort of pain or distress, and therefore they, will become addicted to a behavior or a certain substance of choice. So the problem therein lies the fact that we are so isolated at the moment. I think we have found ways to connect, but when we look at mental health statistics coming through, and as I said, the increase in demand for services in the field at this time, people are feeling isolated. You don't have to be completely alone to be isolated. You can still feel very disconnected. People's lifestyles have changed. People aren't able to see family members that they were able to see. They aren't able to travel. So there's a lot about isolation at the moment. And then, of course, how this can trigger not only relapses, but it can also result in people being more susceptible to addictions, and individuals who are experiencing an addiction to struggle even more during this time. So if that's sort of something you are interested in, I really recommend to you to read Johan Hari's book. And the joy of being at home and here in my study is that I can quickly show you. His book is Chasing the Scream, a phenomenal book that addresses how the war on drugs has completely failed us, and failed people with addictions across the world, and how if we look at how isolated we have become as individuals, and even isolated from ourselves, how that has created this addiction problem that we sit with across the world. And then his writings and his school of thought and his TED Talks, if you'd like to watch them, come a lot from the research and the experiences of Dr. Gabor Mate, who wrote this book in the realm of Hungry Ghosts. Absolutely phenomenal book. He shares his addiction as well, and his childhood, and how that had impacted his life. And there he was treating addicts, I think, in Canada. He's Hungarian though, so he was treating addicts in Canada, yet he himself was struggling with an addiction, which he was so ashamed of, because he had an addiction to classical music and buying classical music, which sounds crazy. But when you really read his story and how he was risking his patients as well as risking his profession, and because of his addiction that he wasn't dealing with it, it's really eye-opening. So I recommend that to you. So quickly, well, not too quickly, but we do have about 5 minutes. Let's look at some of the guidelines. These are obviously from my perspective. I'm sure if we could engage more here, if we were in an audience, in a room or a conference venue together, we could talk more, but these are my thoughts. So I challenge you to think of some others. But we need to make sure that we're screening our patients or our clients for substance use disorders, especially when they're presenting with high stress levels and anxiety. I think anyone in the EAP field knows, when we look at the reports on the utilization, engagement in the program, we always see stress and relationships coming through as the top presenting problems. But when we scratch further, how much of that is driven, by possible substance abuse or addiction? So we need to explore that. We need to look deeper. We need to ask those questions. And we also need to explore people's coping mechanisms, whether they are presenting with a substance abuse problem or not. Helping people to become more resilient, and helping to identify healthy coping mechanisms during this time under the limitations, that they find themselves in, with a changed lifestyle, with being at home and so forth.
Carol, just
yes.
from my side, you don't have to rush through this part. You can go over if you need an extra 10 minutes, because this is quite important.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Nicole. Thanks for that. All right. And then also, please be alert on signs of behavioral addiction. So here I'm speaking obviously to treatment professionals, but also to managers and supervisors managing teams remotely. It's hard to pick up those signs. I mean, I still need to come up with a magic list. I have brainstormed, and I've read what I can to see what are the signs of picking up on behavioral addictions and even substance abuse issues, for example, remotely. It is more challenging, but we need to look out for those. And let's also then be cognizant of the fact that we do now, for those of us working from home, we're online all day. We have access to our phones all day. We no longer have people supervising us or colleagues walking around that can see our screens. So gambling addiction is on the increase. It's more easily accessible remotely. People don't have to go to the casinos to engage. Online shopping, I never thought I'd be an online shopper. And I saw a meme the other day that I could relate to, you know, how when the delivery arrives, it's almost like a surprise. What is it? What did I order? It could be anything because I don't even remember what online orders I've placed. I feel more comfortable shopping online now without going to shops. You know, so we do need to be careful. Some of us are engaging in these behaviors that we never did before. And then, of course, access to pornography, eating. I was speaking to someone this week who said, you know, they're very isolated, working on their own at home, feel very disconnected from their team, and they find that they're eating all day. They have put on so much weight during lockdown, during this whole sort of 10-month period already, because they're constantly eating, and it's helping them to manage stress. But they realize it's becoming an issue that they need to address now. So we need to be aware of that. We need to come up with a good list of warning signs. I mean, yes, when the camera's on, perhaps you can look out for the usual things like bloodshot eyes, the person seeing, you know, maybe, you know, disengaged, overly tired, very distracted, maybe a bit disheveled and not looking after themselves physically anymore. You know, we need to pick up on distress, on anxiety, and so forth. And it's not always easy when you're only engaging with your colleagues and your team members, with a few voice notes or phone calls or WhatsApps or through, you know, virtual meetings. So we need to put that list together as a profession, and start to be more aware of what are the signs we need to look at remotely in particular. And then finding creative ways to connect with not just our clients, but our colleagues, our employees. I think, as I say, we've done it quite well virtually in most cases. I think we've done it well. There's still many practitioners, I think, that have been afraid to embrace technology. There are still some, you know, individuals in the workplace that are nervous of technology. And, you know, when you say it's Zoom meetings with cameras on or whatever, there's an absolute sort of panic and sometimes a resistance even to that. They don't want to switch their cameras on. But even the challenge, you know, not just in terms of being able to treat our clients and have that connection with them through the screen, which we know is so vital, you know, in a therapeutic relationship. But in the workplace, how do we connect with our teams while we're socially distancing and we're working remotely? You know, and if you do search online, and maybe chat to other managers, there are some good ideas out there. I know even for myself, I think we've managed quite well. I have a team of there's about 18 of us. And, you know, we will do things in a meeting like, you know, it's hack day, or everybody, you know, has to share, you know, something in terms of an icebreaker, like one positive word for 2021, or their reflection on their learnings of 2020. So we are having to connect a little bit more, open communication a little bit more, and ask the right questions, so that we are making sure that people are okay, and that we are connecting with them and that they are feeling connected. And then continued awareness and education in the workplace. That is so important. And I think there's almost an excuse, you know, of, well, we can't get staff together now to do any sort of awareness campaign around substance abuse, or around, you know, our concerns with mental health issues, or around addiction and so forth. But we have to, again, think out the box, be creative. You know, I work in the client services department at ICAS, so not in a clinical role there, but I'm so proud of my team because that's our role. What have we done to raise awareness in workplaces and within our client base? It's right from going back to the basics of sending SMSs. Do you know that help is available? Do you know, you know, that substance abuse is on the increase, and how you can access your service, or where you can get help? I have been very pleased to see more managers being willing to engage on virtual platforms. and being able to do more substance abuse awareness talks and sort of upskilling of managers than I've ever done before in my history, you know, at ICAS. So there have been some shifts, but I think if we don't place this on the agenda or on the wellness program for the year, we're doing an injustice, and we're treating this as a taboo subject. We're being ignorant, and we're pretending that it's not there and it's not happening. And I always speak about policies. I have yet to see, and you know, please, if you are a workplace that has revised your policy, my hat off to you, amazing, good job. But where are the workplace policies that have been revised during this time to talk about how they're going to manage substance abuse, to, you know, especially now during lockdown and remote working and so forth, and to reiterate what are the platforms available to support employees, you know, to ensure that individuals know that despite the fact that you are working at home and you're not in the office, the workplace substance abuse policy still stands. You may not drink during working hours. You may not smoke cannabis during working hours. Are we raising awareness around that? Are we revising and looking at our policies to make sure that they're relevant right now and that our employees know about them? And then, are we referring individuals into the EWP when they're struggling? So even before we notice or identify that it's a substance abuse problem, are we picking up where people are struggling, and are we referring them to the EAP or to whatever service it might be that we have available, or whichever service provider it might be? Do managers know how to do that? Do they know that it's available? I was in a client meeting yesterday, and we were just talking about the impact on COVID and loss and bereavement. And we started talking about the fact, that the services are available to help an individual if they're struggling, but also that managers have a role to play in picking up those that are struggling or troubled, as we've always used the term, and making that referral. Because if we sit waiting for individuals, to make that call or to reach out for help, we might lose them, because sometimes they are so overwhelmed with the situation, they're so overwhelmed with the loss, they're caught up in whatever it might be, funeral arrangements and so forth, that they do desperately need the help and support, but they're not getting it, they're not reaching out for it. So are we nudging them? Are we nudging them and making it safe and okay to access support when it's available? And then looking on the more positive and proactive side of things, are we promoting work-life balance? Are we speaking to not even just our clients, but obviously our staff, our employees, our teams, and helping them to navigate that minefield of the blur that is work and life at the moment. Like the other day, one of our directors had called me in the morning and said, "Carol, I saw you were sending emails at 9 o'clock last night, and it's your first week back from leave. That's not a good start to the year." And I was so thankful for that, because I was like, you're right, I promised myself I wasn't going to do that. But I was at home, my laptop was there, so why not just start emailing at 9 o'clock at night? I could be spending that time with my family. So, are we having those conversations? Are we checking ourselves, and are we helping others to navigate that? What are we doing around stress management, building resilience, building, as they say, grit, amongst our teams, amongst our employees, amongst our clients? And how are we helping them make more healthy lifestyle choices, even when they are at home? Perhaps looking at helping them with, healthy eating ideas, offering an online, Zoom exercise session in the morning before the day starts, running, competitions for getting your steps, even though you are at home, and who got the most steps this week, having a step challenge. Those are all the things we could be doing to promote healthy coping mechanisms and healthier lifestyles during this time. And then also to keep in mind, again, going back to connection, how are we connecting with ourselves? How are we engaging in self-care and practicing what we preach as practitioners and managers? How are we helping those in recovery to make sure that they're connecting with treatment, with support? How are we helping individuals connect with family members and the community as well? Remember, all those levels of connection are important for healthy functioning individuals. And then last but not least, I suppose, what are we doing? And I'm going back to the whole concept of creating a safe space where people can come forward for help. What are we doing to normalize addiction? Not saying, yes, addiction is fine, shame you've got an addiction, but what are we doing to make it all right, to normalize that, an addiction is an unhealthy coping mechanism, and that it is okay to come forward and to get help, and that you're not going to be judged, and that you're not going to be stigmatized, that you're not going to lose your job. What are we doing around that? And how are we making it, okay for people not to be okay? And that's me done. Okay, well, I think I've touched on this. Approaching, we need to be compassionate, have empathy, and then obviously not to blame and shame. So that's really what I was saying about destigmatizing. And that's me. So thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. Yes, I've gone slightly over time. I see that. Thank you for the okay for that, Nicole. And then over to the Q&A for anybody that would like to engage a bit further.
Carol, thank you so much. Can I just have a thumbs up, Carol? Can you hear me?
Okay.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for your input. Yes, we have quite a few Q&As, and due to the time limit, we're going to try and work efficiently through it. So, Carol, if you don't mind, I'm going to run through some of the questions, and I think just being the expert in the field, if you can just sort of give us your experience or your viewpoint on some of these questions that has come through. I'm going to start on the answered side because some people gave some thumbs up and then he throws it to the other side. One of the questions that came through was the question, does drug abuse lead to some mental illnesses?
Sure. I'd have to say yes. In some cases, it absolutely does. And let me use the example of alcohol there. It is by classification a depressant of the central nervous system. So what happens as well as we are drinking, there are various neurotransmitters, neurochemicals, etc. in our brains that are working. So dopamine and serotonin are affected with all the drugs and, of course, with alcohol. So yes, a chemical depression, for example, can be a long-term outcome of excessive drinking. And the sad thing is, much as we think that we use some of these substances or we engage in drinking because it helps to calm our nerves, it helps to manage anxiety, at the end of the day, it does result in actually increasing anxiety levels because of the impact on our brain and the chemicals and that within our brain, but also because of the anxiety and stress that it causes as we go through that sort of if I can say process of addiction, and it starts to impact on our relationships, our fear of losing our jobs, our sort of sense of self-worth and self-pride and the guilt and so forth that comes through, and all those mechanisms involved in substance use as well. So I'm giving a very broad answer, but the answer is yes. It can exacerbate mental health issues and cause more anxiety and addiction, and depression.
Yes. No, thank you so much, Carol. I do agree. I think there is so many substances or unknown substances in certain drugs that we just never know when it triggers a default within our genetic system. So absolutely. Another question that came forward was, do we think, or do you think that rehabilitation does help to a person who is indecisive in quitting drugs? So
yeah,
they're not ready to leave, but I'm going to go to the rehab center, but the commitment to stop is not there. Do you think it will help, the indecisiveness going to a rehab?
That is a really good question, and like $1 million question, because it really can go either way. So textbooks will tell us no, unless the person has hit rock bottom, unless their motivation is completely internal and they're ready for that, for that change, and they're ready, to take on recovery, they're not going to recover. But I have seen cases over the years that, you almost have the worst prognosis. The individual goes into a treatment facility or even in an outpatient treatment, program for all the wrong reasons. They're just getting a boss off their back or a partner off their back or the family off their back. They come in with extreme anger and they're not ready for this. They're not ready to commit. And through good therapy and good treatment, there can be a shift. And I think a key thing that is important there as well is that the family is getting treatment and support as well. Going back to that it doesn't happen in a vacuum. The family needs to be treated and be helped as well to deal with this problem, manage the anger and so forth, while the individual is also being assisted. And I can think of successful cases where people were involuntary in their treatment, and yet through the program or through the treatment shifted and managed to come clean or to be sober and are success cases. So can go either way.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. We have a practitioner in Port Elizabeth who specializes in involuntary committals. So clearly the person is definitely not voluntary agreeing to go. And as Oprah said, often in the process of rehab, there's the light bulb moment. And we never know when that light bulb moment comes for that person, that the penny drops, that I have a problem and it's time for change. So yeah, we just never know when that happens.
You've got to try. I believe that it's worth a try.
No. Okay, another question is, which is maybe a little bit more difficult, is how can one help a person to declare their drug abuse?
Okay. So I think that they possibly mean to be able to come forward to admit to it. I think coming from a place of acceptance, non-judgmental, warmth, and that you can. It's a long road. It can be a very long road. I mean, we do know there's an intervention called constructive intervention, where you can have sort of close individuals of that, or close loved ones or so forth of that individual who will prepare a sort of a structured session, really with the help of a social worker or psychologist, and lay out all the reasons why they're concerned, sort of really give the evidence of things that have happened, and try to get that individual to that point where they then say, all right, I admit, I have a problem and I do need help. So there is a constructive intervention as an approach we could use. But, if it's just someone you care for or even a colleague, I think to show that you're approachable and that you're open to talking about that, and not to make false accusations as well, because then you're going to push them away. But to find a way to have those conversations with them where you can say to them, if you ever needed some help or support, I want you to know that I'm there for you, that you can come to me and I'll do whatever I need. Or, if you're not ready, because I can see that you're struggling and I can see that something's going on, you may not be ready, but I want you to know when you are ready, I'm here. You're very welcome to speak to me, and I'll do what I can to support you and to get you the help that you need. So starting the conversation to me is key.
Okay. Here's another question that came in, and as a practitioner, I can sort of identify whenever I need to see somebody with a substance abuse, I have the silent prayer, please let him have a medical aid. Because then at least I know I have resources available depending on the problem. I personally get quite maybe anxious when there is no resources as a medical aid, and I know I cannot send them to a rehab center because the resources is not there. So the question the person is asking here, John Gertzer, he says, is there anybody out there who are willing to share their best practices or strategies how to deal constructively with substances within the workplace? So I know you touch on the whole policy thing, and I'm not sure if he's referring specifically if there's no resources, if there is resources, because I think the approaches is then very differently.
Of course, yeah, because I think there's approaches from a workplace perspective in terms of what support they provide, like referral into an EAP. Some workplaces do provide access to a treatment facility. They'll sponsor the use, the stay. And then there's also approaches that we would use, you know, as a practitioner ourselves. So, for example, the solution-focused model, which is, for example, most EAPs like ICAS, most service providers would work from a solution-focused model. I mean, there are so many different, you know, whether it's cognitive behavioral, whether it's what's the other one came to mind, motivational therapy. There are so many different types of practices, but yes, it is difficult when somebody doesn't have a medical aid, and it seems that, you know, admission into a treatment facility is the only option. So sometimes we do need to look at outpatient treatment and what is available through something, you know, like SANCA, for example. There is also inpatient beds that, you know, do become available. I recently managed to get somebody into SANCA in East London, because they do have sponsored beds. I just had to do a motivation. We had to get a GP to do a medical assessment and include that in the report. And I am aware that even Clinic normally has sponsored beds here in Gauteng as well. So I'm just mentioning two there that come to mind. But yes, sometimes we have to think out the box, because it's not as easy as a medical aid, you know, that we can tap into or that we can send them to treatment for. But there is, you know, support out there. There are means of treatment out there that don't have to go through a medical aid. That's certainly my learning.
I think some of the comments, I mean, it's not as much questions, but some of the comments that I've read earlier is that some of our viewers or participants feels that the workplace gives too much chances. You sort of go for rehab, you default, and you get another chance, and we'll send you back to rehab. And there is sort of saying it's not too easy. People go to rehab, they get full salaries, and maybe that's the problem. They should get only half the salaries. Yeah, a little bit of that the employer is too lenient. And I think there's this whole debate also about the addiction being a health problem versus the debate about whether it is a health problem or not as well, you know.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. And I mean, we need to also firstly just understand, when I'm saying addiction, I'm talking about, you know, where it's been diagnosed. I mean, there are criteria that we use to formally diagnose an individual to say there is an addiction. You know, then of course there's just those that are still in the stage of abuse. There are still recreational users. There are different levels of users. So I'm certainly referring to individuals where it is a medical issue in terms of they have been diagnosed. The workplace being too lenient, I can certainly think of that, because sometimes it is easier than facing disciplinaries just to continue sort of ignoring the problem or pushing the problem under the carpet or whatever it might be. And then the other individuals who will say that their workplace doesn't provide enough support, you know, that there is such a zero tolerance policy that there's no chances given. So finding a happy medium, which is guided by a policy, and whether it's a safety sensitive environment or not is important. So, you know, if your policy outlines that you'll get referred, you into the EAP, for example, we'll cover one treatment for you, and on a second offense, there will be a warning given and a suspension or whatever it might be. The policy is what's going to guide the workplace. And then it's important to ensure that the workplace is following that policy. Because yes, without it, you know, you can just go in either direction and we can swim round and round in circles.
Okay, we've got a few more, so I'm going to try to do 30-second answers, Carol. So let's see how does this go. We have a question here from Boitomelo, who's saying, when we're talking about drinking during working hours, especially now that we are working from home, it is so difficult to pick up obvious signs if someone is intoxicated over a video or a Teams call. It's like you with your apparent bottle of water. Unless they have slurred speech, but some of us are really good at hiding the intoxication. What are practical steps that the manager can take to address with the employee working from home and we suspect that there is abuse happening while they're capturing a report or doing their admin next to a glass of something?
Absolutely, yeah. So sometimes that the signs might come through in errors that they make, you know, just changes in behavior and performance, you know, within the team or within their work responsibilities. So some of the normal things to look out for, you know, even absenteeism, not logging in for meetings, always having excuses, extra sick days, noticing errors, bad judgment in terms of their work, not meeting deadlines and so forth. And I personally believe as a manager, whether I suspect that substance abuse or not, when I see a change in performance and behavior, it's my responsibility as a manager to address that with that particular individual. Whether it lands up being substance abuse during working hours or not, doesn't matter. I might, find some other cause or reason for it. So it needs to be addressed. And again, I go back to step one, make sure that all your workplaces know what the policy is. Start with that. Start with educating them on that. And what are the transgressions and what are the consequences if they do. And then you also can address it when you pick it up, with somebody. Again, you're not accusing that it is substance abuse, but you can share. I've started to notice a difference. I've started to notice an increase in errors. I've noticed that you're not meeting deadlines. I am concerned as your manager, what is going on? So starting that conversation again is vital. Keep track of the warning signs or the signs that you see. That's great. You can use them then as your evidence, but start those conversations with the individual. Start addressing the behavior and dig deeper and then see what comes through. I don't think that was 30 seconds, sorry.
Okay, here's quickly another one that is possibly linking. They're asking, it jumps now, can workplace policies be used to curb drinking when working from home? And if so, how? Personally, I don't think it's a question whether you work from home or in the office. If you are employed to work from Monday to Friday, 8 to 5, that is working hours, irrespectively of the venue. So would not the same workplace policy apply? Do we really need a separate policy when working from home?
No, definitely not. I agree with you, Shemaine. It's a matter just of that policy being updated to say that this applies to remote working as well. Whether you're working at home or you're working in a restaurant while you sip on your coffee or whatever it might be, it applies. So that just needs to be updated so that employees understand that, because they may take advantage of the fact that it's never been said or they've never been told or made aware of it. And then, of course, you sit in trouble with the CCMA or a disciplinary issue if they're not aware of the policy. And secondly, no, it makes no difference. You are employed and you are being paid to perform certain duties between whatever hours it might be. And that time needs to be substance-free, because you are not able or allowed to drink or engage in substance use during your working hours while your employer is paying you for a job.
I really think it's just the employer's responsibility to sort of just create awareness around these issues. Okay, another one is, I quickly want to run through this. Are there rehab institutions for behavioral addiction?
Yes.
Or only therapy is offered?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Most of the facilities these days cover behavior addictions. Off the top of my head, because I'm in Joburg, I can immediately tell you Elam Clinic, a very good success rate with dealing with everything from sex addiction, pornography, definitely gambling addiction. I've had a few of my gambling patients go in there. Kenilworth in Cape Town is another one. I've certainly had patients in for gambling. Many of the facilities cover, eating disorders. Think of your keto clinics and that, but eating disorders that may well then be addiction related as well. Yes, they cover all addictions now. It's not just about substances.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely a lot of resources. Okay, another question I just quickly need to see. This is an interesting one, maybe on the lighter side. Carol, if one has 1 or 2 drinks almost daily, is that an addiction? Be careful, Carol, be careful. You answer that one.
Okay.
30 seconds.
No, an addiction, if there is consequences, if people are concerned, if it's having negative impact in your life, your health, your relationships, it's an addiction. But be careful of functional addiction, where it becomes a pattern and a habit, because addiction is a progressive illness. So we start with that habit, and next thing we know, we're adding an extra drink into the mix because we've had a really rough day and we need to self-medicate. So you can walk a very fine line. But no, that's not classified as addiction unless there's consequences, there's negative consequences, there's concern, there's impact on your behavior, your health, your functioning, and so forth.
Okay. Is there a correlation between alcohol consumption and COVID infection?
Sure. I haven't seen any research on that yet. I don't know that in South Africa we have the capacity to do that kind of research. I don't think we'll ever know. I don't think.
As you shared, there's a 17% increase in consumption, but I can think that the behavior, the risk behavior that goes with that could possibly, no masking, social distancing, that totally disappears. You've picked up on decrease in addiction. Oh, don't jump. You have picked up on decrease in addiction behavior coupled with the increase in domestic violence. Okay, so they're asking the question about the link with domestic violence. But I think COVID or no COVID, there is a direct correlation between those two.
Absolutely.
We've got like less than a minute, actually not even a minute. Remote working has become the new norm in some countries, but with these findings that people are behaving inappropriately while working from home, would you say it's better working in an office than remotely?
I think that's such a subjective answer, or question for all of us, because some love working from home and thrive, and others thrive in the office. I don't know. I can only say, personally, I miss the energy of being in an office. I do miss being with my team and being able to pick up more if they are struggling, when I see them face to face. But it's a personal thing. I can't say. I can just say we need to get comfortable with this. This is going to be the future way of work for many of us, and maybe a blended model of a bit of office and a bit of home.
Okay. People, I'm very much aware that our time is officially over. Carol, do you have another 5 minutes for those who want to stay on, and let's run through the rest? And if people need to exit, I'm just asking, is that possible?
I'm fine. I'm fine.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to continue with the Q&A. There's like another 5 or 6 questions. For those of you who need to go, thank you so much for attending this session. I am very excited for this year, and the EduWeb platform that EAPA-SA will use going forward in supporting and educating for us in the field of occupational health and working with employees reaching a place of wellness. Okay, thank you, people. Goodbye for those of you who need to go. For the others, stick around. Carol has now 45 seconds to answer the questions. Okay, they're asking, what is your view regarding the reviews of legislation on regulations of alcohol sales in South Africa?
Yeah, good one. I think for those that don't know, the proposed Liquor Amendment Act that needs to be tabled by Cabinet very soon is looking at increasing the drinking age to 21, zero tolerance for drinking and driving, no alcohol advertising. I think those are the 3 key things. I actually wrote them here so that I didn't forget. Oh, look, I think increasing the drinking age to 21 has certainly worked in many countries. I still believe, as always, people, youngsters will continue to experiment. They'll find ways to access alcohol. But the good thing is then, we don't have, the rite of passage in terms of turning 18, you can legally drink and buy alcohol, and you can now drive a car, all happening at once. So at least there is a 3-year gap there. So maybe we will see, some good things happen. With the history of cigarette advertising in South Africa, when they stopped cigarette advertising, for example, with associating it with cricket, and you walked into the cinema and you watched, what was it, Benson and Hedges? I can't even remember those adverts, but they were in Cancun, Mexico, and all those. They certainly found there's a correlation between advertising and smoking. So certainly we may see good results then if we limit the advertising of alcohol. And I'm 100% behind zero tolerance for drinking and driving. I think that's great, because people will always push the envelope there. Their limit might be, 3 drinks before they're 0.05, and then they'll push it and continue to drink and think they'll be just fine on the roads, and we know that that's not the case. So I'm strongly in support of that. And the advertising, on the fence a little bit about changing the legal age.
Yeah, I personally am, and just in view of the bottle stores closing twice, and not that it really fazed me, but I do enjoy my glass of red wine. But I am actually saddened by the fact that we live in a community and we live in a society where people can't control the use. I think the devastation that in the midst of a pandemic that people are unable to control was sort of a bit of a light bulb moment for me, that I just like, we are adults, we are supposed to be mature, we need to see the grave weight of the situation. Okay, here's another one, and this is going to be a bit of a tricky one. They're saying, Carol, how can we help someone who has been through several rehab programs and still does not change and accept that they have a challenge and need to transform their behavior? So few rehabs, but the behavior continues. How do we help someone like that?
That immediately my question that came into my mind there was, is someone or many someone's enabling that behavior and allowing that person to continue, with the negative behavior. So there's not enough negative consequences. I'm not a big believer in rock bottom, that a person has to hit the proverbial rock bottom to be able to come right, to get help, to be healthy again. I don't think we need a rock bottom. There might just be, as you say, a light bulb moment. But to me, it sounds like that individual is not ready, but I'm worried that there's enabling happening there. And that speaks to me that the family members need to be engaged in that person's treatment process as well. And if it's within a workplace, I think there as well, the manager and the team need to look at more dire consequences for that individual. And sometimes, letting them face the consequences so that they realize they do need to make the change. It's a tough one.
No, okay. Then Jana Visser just said maybe we can help the addict from a negative mindset to a positive mindset. I think that came quite clear in the video that you shared. Yes. That the approach needs to change. Is it possible to provide us with the criteria used to state that someone is an addict? I'm really not sure if this is really the platform. I think this is when we start looking at addiction, the criteria for addiction and treatment options, but maybe you can just share 2 or 3 specific.
If I can just share, the DSM, is it what, the 5 now? I lose track. The DSM-5 has the criteria, but if you were to, I'm sure, Google that, you could find the criteria then for scoring someone for an alcohol problem. For example, the gambling one, I know offhand, I use that almost daily. It's things like, is the person preoccupied? Do they lose control? Has there been negative consequences? Has it impacted on relationships? So there is specific criteria, and you literally tick, between 1 and 10 and score the individual, and then it will put them in the category of, substance use disorder, or, for example, gambling addiction or problem gambling. So the DSM-5 is the Bible for those criteria. And then there are others that you can just use. Even the AA has their 20 questions, which are based on the criteria that's used within the DSM-5. But the DSM-5 is my answer there.
Yeah, okay. And then the last question that I'm going to look at is, I say, in our families and community, there are no support systems. How do we deal with matters to influence positive attitudes within our community? Because it is assisting in promoting addiction instead of decreasing it. So, ideally, people have medical aids and these resources, but how do we deal? I mean, I must be honest, Carol, Port Elizabeth is about 3.5 hours from East London. We don't have a Sanka. So no wonder I pray when I have a client. So there is really very little resources. We could possibly send them to a government. We have a place in Grahamstown, but the waiting list, if we had to commit them, there is 6 months to possibly a year. So any ideas when there is no resources?
Yeah, I think there I'd have to put my sort of social work activist hat on and say, sometimes we have to look within communities to create those resources. You know, there is no reason why a community can't get together. You just need somebody to step up and get that going. But to run, for example, a tough love group to help, you know, parents and significant others in terms of dealing with, you know, loved ones, substance abuse. You could connect with AA, NA, GA, any of those who will give you the resources to start getting groups going within that community. Perhaps there is a department of social development, or I know I come from Grahamstown recently and there's no Sanka there either, but what is there? Perhaps there's a FAMSA, and they're willing to look, because there's a need in the community, that they can start getting you know, a substance abuse program going. I mean, NGOs have to be more I want to say multitasking, but that's not the right word. I think my brain's tired now. But you know, we can't just work in little silos. So we need to go look at what is there, approach them, what could they possibly do to assist, and even, you know, a group of parents, or working through a school that might provide a hall to start getting a group going, a group of concerned parents who want to start looking at the issue, or getting a substance abuse you know, committee going, or that sort of thing. So sometimes it just takes somebody to step up and get those resources going. We all wait for somebody else to do it.
I think it would just be interesting. You touch on the AA, and I'm not here to promote anything, but I have contact with the AA, and with COVID, all AA face-to-face meetings has been stopped. So there's no face-to-face meetings, but I have also discovered they have online meetings. So yes, again, if we can just provide somebody with the internet. I mean, I had a family member of mine who decided to access AA in this flipping COVID time. And they said, please link me to the AA. And I started making the calls, and that is when I discovered no face-to-face. And I'm like, well, this is really a nice time. The person at last asked for help, and now we have a resource problem. But then I was able to arrange for online, where I said, okay, I've got internet at my home, come sit at my computer, let me give you access, and let's close the door. So we really just need to get creative. There are some resources out there. It's maybe not what we used to, but I think as COVID has transformed the world that we live in, there's a lot of transformation that is happening in how we deal with it. I think one thing that is a need that I'm coming, and maybe it's my need, maybe it's not as much as the need of the group, but I have had people asking the question, some strategies, you know, so maybe at some stage we can discuss at the EAPA, maybe a training course, just when there is limited resources from a therapeutic point of view. What are some of the therapeutic interventions that can be used for somebody with an addiction problem in the workplace? Specifically, as we know, within EAP, we have either the 4 or the 6 or the 8 session model to help an employee per problem area that he has. So how do we deal with that? So maybe that's a topic for another day.
Love it. Yeah, that would be amazing.
Okay. Carol, thank you so much. Go and drink your water. I can understand your throat being totally parched.
I'm moving on to my drug of choice. I'm moving on to coffee now. So thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen that stayed behind, thank you so much for the questioning. I really hope I've touched on all of them. We will see you at the next EduWeb. Please register on those links that Nicole have posted. And yeah, stay in touch, stay informed, and let's make it happen for 2021 and connect with those who have addiction problems. Maybe it starts with changing our mindsets as well. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, people.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.